Well, hi everyone. This is Dean Woodbeck from InCommon. Thanks for joining us today for IAM Online. And we've got a good program for you today. And just a reminder that IAM Online is brought to you by InCommon and Internet 2 and the EDUCAUSE Higher Education Information Security Council. We're recording today's session, just FYI, and you can ask questions via the chat. And you can do that as we go along, and then we'll pose those to the speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our host for today and moderator, Vaughn Welch, who's the director of the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research Institute at Indiana University. Vaughn, and he's also a member of the InCommon Steering Committee. So Vaughn, take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Dean. And I thank our audience for joining us today on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is paving the way for research collaboration using identities, and particularly federated identities. We've got three great speakers for you here today, and my role is really just to set a little bit of the foundation for this road we're going to pave, and then stand back and let them do. So one thing I wanted to point out, and I love this slide from Scott Cranda, who's the third speaker here today, and this is actually 5 years old, but still a great slide, which is sort of, bridging a thing in terminology and why identity matters to research. And, most scientists don't, think much of identity management if they hear that term, but if you ask them about project membership, access to data in papers, and these sorts of very collaboratory, terms that are meaningful in their world, they care about these things intensely. And I think, as this audience can probably easily imagine, these things are really built on identity and access management. And the observation I want to make for those of us who are close to this subject is, we spend a lot of effort curating our campus identity management systems, and those identities in there are incredibly valuable for collaboration and working together across campuses. And we put a lot of talent and effort goes into maintaining those identity management databases and making them available both inside of campuses and then, hopefully increasingly outside of the campuses. And without access to something like those campus identity management systems for collaborations, one gets what I like to call IDM in a closet. Not quite as good as the cluster in a closet alliteration, but hopefully you get the idea of what I mean, which is sort of collaborations and science projects building their own identity management systems completely from scratch, which has a number of drawbacks to it. I mean, those of you who run these things know that's hard to get right. It draws effort away from really what these science projects are looking to do, which is their research agenda. And I think a key point from the campus perspective is most campus CIOs I talk to are struggling for ways to get visibility into the research that's going on at their campus. And if they can enable their identity management systems to be used for that research, it provides a key hook for understanding what's going on and who's interacting with what external bodies. Then a key thing to understand, which you'll hear from all three of our speakers, is those probably familiar, joining InCommon, establishing an IDP is all great, but attribute release is really the key. The message you'll hear from our speakers today is what these research service providers need for their science mission is a persistent identifier to be able to basically understand, is this the same researcher you enrolled yesterday, so that you can do access control, data ownership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these fundamental bases of managing a scientific collaboration. And then also, as will be discussed, you can do that on a one-by-one case basis, but really what we are pushing for is for folks to sign up and release attributes to the InCommon research and scholarship category. And so you'll hear more about that, but that's a key takeaway message for folks today, is the importance of that research and scholarship category for supporting scientific collaboration scalably. So I just wanted to point out the InCommon Steering Committee did pass a resolution to really make the most out of federated identity, is moving towards a release of a common set of attributes to all service providers. So just to add a little bit more weight behind this attribute release and how important it is and how critical it is out there for the service providers and the researchers out there wanting to make use of it, that this is something that is really critical. And that lack of attribute release continues to be, we've made progress on this front, but it continues to be a big problem. So just some numbers, InCommon is now approaching, if it's not already at 900 participants. But the global RNS category, there are now over 50 service providers in the research and scholarship category seeking to receive these attributes. But of those 900 participants, only 120 roughly identity providers release to those RNS services. And then only 39 are releasing on a global scale. So you'll hear more about EDUGAIN and the global release today. So these numbers are still low, and the result is that it's really common for a research service provider to stand up in InCommon and report less than half of its users being able to use federated identity management to access it. So this is still a big gap in our community's efforts to support research and science. And I think part of this, which hopefully will convince you of today, is identity federation is often thought of as a campus-to-business solution. So it works really well when you've got a third-party commercial provider. It provides a good set of standards by which you and that provider to communicate. And what we expect and what we've seen is a lot of businesses processes are set up around that assumption. So releasing attribute becomes a big policy request that somebody needs to make to somebody in central IT. And that sort of thing is just a complete enigma to the biologists and the scientists and others who are out there who you start telling them they have to go to their central IT office and request an attribute release, and you've created a big barrier to enabling their collaboration. And so we're really asking folks to take that on proactively, at least in releasing towards RNS, so we don't have to drag the domain scientists into the middle of our attribute release processes. So with that bit of background in front of you, I'd like to quickly introduce our three speakers today, and then I will pass it off to Chris, who will kick us off. So Chris Whalen is a contract program manager with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is part of the NIH. He runs the international program for the Office of Cyber Infrastructure and Computational Biology, and he's going to be discussing a re-engineering of the collaboration platforms in response to the realities of trust federation. After Chris, we will have Kathleen Fitzpatrick from the Modern Language Association, and she will discuss the association's project Humanities Commons, which envisions using federated identities as a critical part of its infrastructure. And then last but not least, we'll have Scott Corenda from the LIGO project, who's going to talk about the impact of the International EDUGAIN, Federation of Federations, external identity providers, and some why researchers make the choice that they make when it comes to access. So with those introductions made, I'd like to turn it over to Chris now as our first speaker.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so I think Vaughn pretty much covered everything for my introduction. I've been working at the NIH in support of IT there for over 20 years now, and so over the last couple of years, which makes us kind of a baby in this world, we've been setting up a platform for collaboration using the trust federations. So my presentation, I want to go over what is the NIH for those of you who may not know some of the intricacies of our organization, talk about differences in approaches from in vivo, in vitro, and in silico research and how that impacts collaborations and sharing of data. Then how our current model for a collaboration platform as a service provider was set up, what the topology was, and then why we had to change that topology. And then I'd like to end with a discussion of attributes and how they can impact academic research and grantees. So first, National Institutes of Health, these are all easily available statistics, but just a quick view of where all of the research is. There's 27 institutes, covers just about every part of the human body, and different syndromes and problems, drug abuse, alcohol addiction, cancer, Eye Institute, genome, and the one that I work at is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is the second largest institute after National Cancer Institute. By the founding documents of the NIH, whatever that from Congress, 80% of the budget has to go to grants and funding external research at universities, medical schools, and other research institutions. That includes 300,000 researchers and 50,000 grants, and just about every university and research institution in the United States, and probably and many more around the world. In addition to the extramural program, there's also the intramural program, which is based in the Bethesda campus. That's the one that I've been primarily supporting for the last 20 years. That includes 1,200 principal investigators, 4,000 postdocs, and it's the largest biomedical research institution in the world. It's got a huge infrastructure, which you can see there in the aerial shot. Right there in the foreground is the clinical research hospital, and it's a 240-bed research hospital. And all around it and behind it, you can see the other buildings that make up the NIH. So just to talk about how there's some differences in what the why federation is important for us is if you look at sort of the old model of the test tube Petri dish model, which is still, of course, going on, very often when you had collaboration between institutions and investigators, they would send a member of their lab to another lab to learn how to do one of the techniques that might have been developed at that lab that they need for an ongoing collaboration or for a grant submission or to, for an existing grant. So that trainee or whoever it is then returns to their institution. It's very easy for them to go to one institution, learn that technique. They can get a visitor pass, and get guest access into the facility. That's usually not a problem. Now, if we go to the new in silico research model, it gets a little bit more complicated. And just as a side note, it's important to note that even though most of the research may be done in a test tube and a Petri dish, it is also absolutely using some form of computational infrastructure. There's no research that is not computational in some way now. So when somebody needs to access those tools at another institution, it would require them to have a guest pass. But the guest passes in our world, in the identity management world, are much more difficult. If it's a institution that is taking any responsibility whatsoever to identity management and who has access to their infrastructure. I think that's becoming more and more of an issue as the security situation evolves. So that makes it very difficult for someone to visit an institution either virtually, remotely, or in person and learn how to use those tools. And so I think that's one of the really interesting capabilities that the Trust Federations offer, is the ability for us to provision those tools and access and sharing using Trust Federation without having to go through the added overhead of creating accounts. So just a quick, hold on a second. One of the other things that we've seen is that because of the overhead in creating accounts, even volunteer accounts are now being charged to the labs at our institution. So if you want to have a volunteer that has a guest access or has access for a limited amount of time, there is a charge to the laboratory or to the branch at some level for creating that account, maintaining that account, and doing whatever assurance of identity is required for accounts in that institution. So I think that's important to note. What we want to do also is to be able to plug in new software tools as they are developed, because it very often makes it is difficult for new analysis tools and data analysis tools and other computational software to be shared very quickly or put into a platform that other collaborators at other institutions can access and use. So what we've targeted are specifically the area that we support, which is international research. It is largely observational. We don't do very many interventional studies. And we do a lot of vector analysis or vector studies on mosquitoes and sandflies and disease transmission. So these are really the tools that we've identified as being most useful for our investigators. And if you look at this, you can see we want to put these all behind our service as part of our service provider option for the investigators and the international collaborators. The one that is green is the one that we've actually completed deployment of, and that's the document library with versioning. And that's published as a service provider into InCommon and into EduGain. The two yellows and the yellow item under communication tools are in the process or partially deployed, and the gray ones are still in our development and testing environment and have not yet been deployed. One of the advantages that we see with this, in addition to everything else that I've already gone over, is the ability to have a homogeneous audit trail that allows us to use the same identity across all of these different tools and see who accessed what when and did what with it. And that's a very important part of research in order to ensure the integrity of the data. And it also has regulatory compliance with respect to human research. Okay, so we started out with the idea that we would use a full mesh model. And what this would allow us to do is have a single co-managed registry, co-managed being a tool that allows us to use those federated identities and use them for accessing our services. And then we would have multiple service providers. Each one would be able to consume that single co-managed data, so that if a user was given from one university was given access to a tool at one service provider, they would also have access to that in one of our other service providers if that's what the collaboration required. However, I'll go into some of the problems we've had with that. So then we also have international sites that we support, one in West Africa, one in East Africa, and one in South Asia. And so the two that we had in Africa, we've sponsored those into InCommon so that they could have their own identity providers and that their investigators at those sites would be able to participate more equally within the Trust Federation and access those services. And then each one of those sites, in addition to having an identity provider, also has a service provider with some of these tools. All of the collaborations, as I mentioned, are managed through that single co-managed registry for identity. So if a collaboration is established, I'm researching malaria, drug resistance, and I have research that's going on in Southeast Asia, as well as in Mali, and in East Africa as well, and I have a service provider in each one of those locations. I add that person to that collaboration once, and they have the access to each one of those services for that protocol or that grant. So this is what that looks like. If you look in the large circle in the upper left-hand corner with the identity providers, that's where all of our collaborators are coming for, including the NIH users and the researchers at our international research sites. Each one of those services, SharePoint was the first service that we deployed into this, so that's what I'm showing here, can access each one of those service providers and with the access granted to them from that single co-managed registry. Now, reality was a little bit different. So, unfortunately, what we discovered was that in the global environment of EduGain, we were getting about a 17% success rate for enrollments, which meant that the rest, the other 80%, were failing in their academic enrollment, and we were forced to roll them into a commercial IDP using our Cirrus Gateway. It's a company that provides that gateway service, and asking those who did not already have a commercial IDP or a commercial identity such as Gmail or Hotmail to create one for this purpose. In the last year, and looking at the data that we've been able to collect, we believe that we can increase our enrollment success to roughly 50% if we switch from using the mesh model with multiple service providers to going with a hub and spoke model that will allow us to support EPTID. So as you can see there, this will allow us to support not just EPPN, but EPTID, the combination of EPPN and EPTID, and perhaps EPUID as well. So what that hub and spoke model looks like, using the same, is that now our co-managed registry and all of our services are behind a single SP that is in the federation, that is in the Trust Federation. And everyone will do their enrollment into the co-managed registry and access those services through that single gateway. That allows us to use a single EPTID for all the services. So just to most of this community who I believe are representing IDPs, yes, to reiterate what we've said many times as VOs and service providers, we really need your attributes. We really prefer a permanently unique identifier for us to use that is not reused. And I think that I've seen some of the information about some of the commercial IDPs, such as Yahoo, for example, which recycles identities or after 6 months or something, I believe, which is a real problem if you're trying to provide services and that that identity is going to change. So EPTID is one of those solutions to that, but it doesn't allow you to scale or to distribute services. And I think that there's a lot of advantages to using a distributed service model. Having run hub and spoke models for other types of services, such as WANs to remote locations of the world, I think a distributed model works a lot better in this respect. But and EPTID doesn't work in that way, or doesn't provide that service. So one of the things that I think is also really important to stress is that a lot of the universities that are out there now are also going to be running their own SPs. And a lot of these services that are supporting collaboration for grantees and researchers at their institutions are also going to be using both. You're going to be supporting both an IDP and your SPs at the same time. So I think that it's not an us versus them. It's a combination of both. And then the other thing that I think that I haven't heard much discussion about is the fact that we really need our developers and our vendors to provide us with services that will work in the Trust Federation model. And this is something that I've come across almost every time we've moved to put a new service into this platform, because each service has a different way of integrating with SAML, if they support SAML at all. And I think that the main problem that we've had is that they don't often have the ability to consume any other attribute other than UID and the authentication assertion. So I would like to stress that, as consumers, and as everyone is a consumer here of these tools, it would be very good for us to all start encouraging our developers, our own developers, as well as our vendors, whether they're for on-prem services or software as a service, platform as a service, to support the use of other attributes. Okay, and just in conclusion, I'd like to just thank everyone in this community who has helped our team over the last couple of years develop this and really, I guess, hold our hand as we move through this. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Chris? If so, please put them in the chat. If not, I will introduce Kathleen Fitzpatrick briefly again, and she is going to talk about the Humanities Commons project. Kathleen, please take it away.
Excellent. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, great. I was going to say the answer to that could be yes or no. So I'm Kathleen Fitzpatrick, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity today to tell you a little bit about this project that my colleagues at the Modern Language Association and I have been working on, called Humanities Commons. For those of you who don't know us, the Modern Language Association is the largest scholarly society in the humanities. We represent more than 25,000 members across North America and around the world. And our members teach and study a very wide range of languages, literatures, and cultures. And so in 2013, we launched a social network called MLA Commons in order to provide those members with a platform for communication and collaboration, to really think about new modes of doing scholarly work, to extend year-round the kinds of conversations that take place at our annual meetings, and to provide means for members to share their work with one another, to create new collaborations, to discuss that work, and so on. But within about 30 seconds of launching the platform, we started hearing from our members about their desire to connect with colleagues in other areas in the humanities. Our members in the humanities work in increasingly interdisciplinary ways, and so we've been looking for ways to support the connections that our members want to make across fields. So MLA Commons, the platform that we've been running since 2013, is built on the Commons in a Box platform, which is a project of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. CBOX is in turn built on WordPress and BuddyPress, which together provide an open source solution for organizations that are seeking rich social networking and publishing capabilities. And as part of our development process, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, we built a plugin for CBOX that authenticates users against our member database and that provides information about the privileges to which they're entitled within the network. Just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what's going on in MLA Commons, the Commons supports a wide range of member interactions, including public group discussions that members can freely join, private group discussions, some of which members can request access to, and others of which are restricted based on member authorization, such as being a member of a committee or an elected officer or something like this. Members can also contribute to or create a wide variety of web-based publications, and they can participate in collaborative document authoring and more. Members can also create extended CV-like profiles that link to their work on the Commons and work that they create around the web. And they can deposit their work, whether it's preprints or data sets or presentations or syllabi, you name it, to Core, which is the repository that we've integrated into the Commons. And they can share that work in the repository with the Commons groups to which they belong. So the repository portion of the site was built in partnership with the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship at the Columbia University Libraries. And the stack that we're using for the repository is Fedora and Solr based. And with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, we built a WordPress plugin that provides the user interface within the Commons for depositing, entering metadata, and discovering and sharing work that's contained within the repository. We actually just announced yesterday that we've received a follow-on grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities that's going to allow furthering that project, and in particular making the repository interoperable with a range of other scholarly data services, and I'll return to that point in a little bit. But at the same time that we were building these other services around the Commons, we started investigating ways of expanding the Commons to create those interdisciplinary linkages for which our members had begun asking right away. So with further support from the Mellon Foundation, we undertook first a planning process, and now we're deep into a pilot project that's designed to connect multiple proprietary Commons instances. This project is still very much in process. We're currently in alpha testing, but we hope to launch in beta later this fall. The desire to connect these independent organizations, as you see, we're linking the Association of Jewish Studies, the Association for Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Studies, and the College Art Association along with us in the MLA. And bringing these organizations together presented us with several immediate complications. First off, there are users who are members of more than one participating organization. There may not be a lot of users in this pilot phase with just these 4 organizations, but as we scale up, as we start adding more organizations from across the humanities, we expect a significant increase in those users who are in that overlapping membership situation. And those users are not going to want to maintain multiple accounts and multiple profiles, and so we have to provide them with the ability to access any of the sites to which they're entitled with a single sign-on, as well as the ability to update their profile information once and have it reflect throughout the network. At the same time, the participating organizations need to be able to ensure controlled access to their portions of the network, such that access forms a valuable member benefit that they can provide. And the organizations with whom we spoke in the planning process were nearly all using different member management systems. I'll return to that in a minute as well. So we not only needed a federated authentication and identity management system, but one that could ensure that members of multiple organizations who may have attributes represented differently by those different organizations would nonetheless be accurately associated, but also that different members with merely similar attributes would be appropriately disambiguated. And moreover, each of the participating organizations has a different internal structure in addition to their different membership management systems. So different membership categories, for instance, different membership exploration policies, different governance structures, different subfield units, and so on. And each of these affects user access to particular areas of the site in different ways. And of course, we needed a system more than anything that wouldn't overwhelm the user with its complexity, right? That would work seamlessly with the systems and credentials that they already know. So we contracted with the Spherical Cow Group to help us in creating a working specification for this identity management system. And they proposed to us a suite of tools, including an identity registry, which would serve as the core system managing identity data from these multiple sources and creating the unique identity for each user. A matching service that would be used to determine if a given identity was already known, a group registry that would be used to manage authorizations or entitlements, an authentication service that would provide the single sign-on portion of the system, and a provisioning service that would be used to synchronize identity data across the service providers. In seeking the solutions to meet these requirements, we worked with an order of preferences that privileged open source over proprietary solutions and existing solutions over solutions that required significant development or entirely new builds. And the result is a system that is a little bit complex, that leverages co-manage, grouper, LDAP, and shibboleth primarily. But given our desire to keep the user experience as simple as possible, we're also making use of various social identity providers such as Google, and we've just become a member of the InCommon Federation within the last few weeks. Now, in building this system, we've brought together a number of different identity sources in the project. Some of these sources are internal to the MLA, including the custom REST API through which we access our own membership database, and the IDP of Last Resort that we're establishing to serve those members who simply do not want to use a social identity to log in. But most of the identity sources that we're working with are external. We're providing a couple of different social identity login options, primarily Google and Twitter, which will be integrated in the shibboleth IDP. And of course, we'll be leveraging InCommon logins through SAML. We're providing an OAuth connection to ORCID in order to permit members to share additional professional information about themselves should they so choose. And we're connecting to all of the partner societies' member databases via a new co-managed capability that we're helping to build out called organizational identity sources. Now, these connections will permit us to determine the privileges that members will have within the network. And I should note at this point that we have opted not to use the partner databases for authentication purposes, in part because so few of the partners to whom we'll be expanding this network in the coming years run reliable IDPs, and in part because of the enormous disparity in the sophistication of the partner databases themselves. I mean, they range from full-fledged CRMs all the way to Excel spreadsheets. So we're relying on other sources for authentication, which then presents us with a real challenge in matching, ensuring that, for instance, a member's Google ID is properly connected to their society's member record. So the initial matching is going to be handled by using verified email addresses, but over time we hope to develop more sophisticated approaches. This, for instance, is a test user whose record indicates membership in 2 partner societies, as well as in the network as a whole, and they're all linked through one matched email address. We're currently working on a way to allow users to claim and verify additional email addresses in the event, for instance, that they've given different email addresses to different partner societies to which they belong. But one key means of simplifying the matching process is going to be allowing members to authenticate at home via InCommon. We've only recently joined the Federation, as I mentioned, and as I understand it, I think we're among the first of the humanities organizations to use InCommon in a significant way. And so being a part of InCommon, I believe, is going to enable Humanities Commons to permit members to log in using secure credentials with which they're already familiar and comfortable, and it will allow us to access authoritative sources for certain user attributes, ensuring the integrity of the interactions that take place within the network. And this integrity is a really key component of what's happening in our conversations in the network. It's important for our members, for instance, to know that the person who's claiming to be Jane Smith, professor of Russian literature at elite private university, is indeed that person. And for that reason, access to the Research and Scholarship Attribute Bundle provides a key means for us to ensure that Humanities Commons remains a trusted space within which our members can share, discover, and discuss scholarly work. Now, these are only the immediate benefits of InCommon for us. We can imagine down the road a wide range of potential futures for scholarly communication and resource sharing that might open up across our networks thanks to the trust fabric that's created by this federation. And these are, as I say, down the road and will require a lot of development. But what, for instance, might be possible if a user were able to leverage her university credentials in order to seamlessly use her library's research resources at home and then discuss those resources in her Humanities Commons research community or reference those resources in a networked publication? And what might be possible if a user were able to seamlessly share work using a disciplinary repository like CORE and have that work automatically represented in her institutional repository? And these kinds of opportunities, again, are going to require significant research and development, but they represent the sorts of interoperability that the research infrastructure of the future that is going to require. I mean, even in fields like the humanities, which seem to many to be less reliant on complex technological resources. And for us, participation in a federation like InCommon is the first step toward exploring these possibilities with collaborating institutions. This is just a little bit of what we're up to and where our project, thinking about the project, is headed, and I'll look forward to discussing the possibilities. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathleen. And we do have a question actually for you and Chris both from Ann West asking what IDP of Last Resort you're using.
We will be running our own. I don't know that our decisions about what that will be have been finalized at this point. That's one of the features that we're still working on in this network, but there will be an IDP of Last Resort of our own in this network.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Well, the objective is not to have our own IDP at all. That's for the collaboration platform. I don't want to run an IDP of last resort, so we have been steering those who are unable to enroll using their academic credentials. We've been steering them towards the commercial, primarily Gmail, Hotmail, and the others. I'm not happy with that either, and I think that things from a legal perspective, that's going to become more of a difficulty. I think that the email incident that's been in the news so much recently has really made people very skittish about using outside anything. Using institutional identities is the preferred solution. So I think that this is still a large question, a question that remains to be answered. I'm not thrilled with the non-commercial IDPs either. So, in fact, been doing some research on those, and I found that one of the ones that I looked at in the last year had actually stopped providing that service. And so I think this is an area that's still very much up in the air.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Good question, Ann, and hope others feel free to wade in. Looks like we have a comment from Matthew. But I'm going to turn this over to our last speaker at this point, Scott Cranda from the LIGO project. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Vaughn. I'm happy to be here today to tell you what we've been doing in LIGO around federated identity. For those of you who don't know LIGO, hopefully you've learned about us recently. We are very excited because we did it. We detected gravitational waves, made the first direct detection back in September. And it was a very exciting time. You can see a plot here of the actual waveforms we observed. These are gravitational waves arriving at the Earth after coming across the universe for millions of years that were from two black holes that inspiraled together, collided, and became one black hole. And in particular, I'll point you to the middle plots there, which show the agreement between the signals we actually observed and those predicted from theoretical models based on Einstein's general theory of relativity. And it could not be more beautiful. And I have to be honest and tell you there were more than a few of us who shed a tear when we saw these most elegant results. We really could not have asked for a better first event from the universe for us to detect. But detection, as exciting as it was, really is not the goal. You know, it's been a more than 20-year effort to build the instruments and set up all the infrastructure to analyze the data. And the real goal has been to actually open up a new window on the universe and to do what we call gravitational wave astronomy. And this nice graphic shows you that we've already begun doing that. LIGO was able, with our first detection, to sample the space of very large solar mass black holes that had never been observed before. There's been no other way to observe them other than through gravitational wave signals. And we even had a second event not too long after the first one. That was on Boxing Day. And there's even a third one that didn't quite meet the threshold for us to call it an event, but we certainly learned some more interesting things from that. So it's really been an incredible, exciting time to begin to build out this new field of gravitational wave astronomy. But it's not just LIGO. We have our two detectors, one in Hanford, Washington, and one in Livingston, Louisiana. But very soon now, LIGO India will begin construction. They're actually looking for a final site right now. There's nothing like a detection to speed paperwork through government bureaucracy, so that was a nice side effect, and we see lots of great progress going on with LIGO India. But we also have sister detectors. There's one in Germany, run by the UK and Germany. There's the Virgo detector, which is a French and Italian project, and then the Japanese are building the Kagra instrument under the mountain, actually. They're tunneling through the mountain to build their interferometer. And so it's a very, very exciting time to begin gravitational wave astronomy. But really, it's not just gravitational wave astronomy we're interested in. To really realize the full science potential of these instruments, we want to do what's called multi-messenger astronomy, and that's combining what we know about sources with what other types of instruments, everything from LOFAR, which is a radio astronomy project, IceCube, which does neutrino detection in astronomy, Fermi Gamma Ray Telescope, the Swift X-ray telescope, all these other instruments can contribute. And so we're really building a huge, large collaboration that can study some of these very interesting astrophysical events together in a collaborative way. And so when you start thinking about this, you know, you ask the question, well, how are we going to build a platform that enables literally thousands of astronomers across hundreds of projects and countries to collaborate? LIGO has already signed more than 60 MOUs to partner with some of these other projects. So we're well on our way to having many, many thousands of people that we want to collaborate with and share our data with. So when we first started thinking about this problem, I've told this story before, it's absolutely true. I was sitting in a bar at a conference after a long day at a conference, wondering about how we were going to do some of these things, and I happened to run into this guy, Ken Klingenstein. I told him about my problems, and he told me he had answers and solutions to my problems, and thus began a very long and fruitful relationship between LIGO and InCommon and the broader community. And we knew right away we wanted to base our infrastructure on federated identity for the usual reasons. We wanted to outsource authentication. That helps us forego a large user support drain. We don't have to worry about provisioning accounts for all these people and then having to worry about how they reset their passwords. And we also knew that it would provide a really streamlined experience for our researchers. Of course, federated identity brings its own challenges. We had to understand how we were actually going to build infrastructure that could consume and then manage these federated identities. We turned to co-manage, and in fact, LIGO helped build co-manage. LIGO was one of the initial projects that invested and applied for a grant from the National Science Foundation, who very graciously helped fund the development of the tool, and we've been using it ever since. We operate a co-managed registry at gw-astronomy.org, and it's how we manage our relationships with our external collaborators. Of course, the question, comes up, well, which federated identities? We could be relying on all kinds of different federated identities, but we knew right away that we wanted to focus on the higher ed and research SAML federations. Of course, it's very closely aligned with our user community. Almost all of our astronomers and astrophysicists that we want to collaborate with have identities available in the higher ed and research SAML federations. Very high coverage, of course, with some caveats that Chris has already mentioned, and I'll mention again. Also, the higher ed and research federations really do have a mission to support research, and we've really appreciated the passion that a number of you bring to helping to support us, and there's really a great sense of service and collaboration that comes through the federation, and we're really grateful for all of the help we've had these many years. And it's really been a wonderful journey, and we're hoping to continue it. I wanted to stress that this is not just an exercise for the very large campuses. We know from experience we have very, very important astronomers who come from really small organizations, and we've seen that world-class research is really being done at all types of organizations. And so it's really important that the federations continue to help build out that long tail because that long tail of the small institutions really helps our users. Of course, as I mentioned, our collaboration is really global, and so we immediately looked to EduGain, and we have a very large overlap with the EduGain Federation. And so really, we rely on federated identity from very many countries that are represented by EduGain. We have published more than one, but this is one example of a service provider, research and scholarship federated service. This is the Gravitational Wave Candidate Event Database. This is where, after that event was detected, we sent our collaborators to go look at the details. And so, on that day, this was a very important research and scholarship federated service, and we're very grateful that it was ready to go with federated identity. Of course, there are problems. Chris has already talked about them. We simply don't have enough EduGain IDPs that release attributes. We really do need a persistent identifier and a non-targeted identifier. I showed you one service, but just like Chris pointed out, there are multiple services that our scientists need to get to, and we need to know it's the same person accessing those multiple services. And because of the number of different identity providers that we work with, we're really looking for scalable attribute release across federations. We have from time to time had IDPs say to us, well, if you happen to have a user from our campus when you get to that point, we'll negotiate something. Just send that user to us, and he'll fill out 6 to 10 pages of some form, and then we'll release attributes to you. But that really doesn't work. We really have so many IDPs that we need to federate with. We really need a scalable solution, and that's really why the research and scholarship entity category was designed. And so as that continues to scale up, it's really working well for us. We just need more IDPs around the world to support it. Of course, when we don't get the attributes, that's a problem. For us, no attributes is really equivalent to no authentication. We really can't use transient or even targeted identifiers. And the problem is the researchers really need access to the services now. We can't tell them, well, go send an email to your campus IT and wait a few weeks and maybe we'll see some progress, or fill out this form that your campus IT has made available and then maybe we'll get some attributes. Or please go have a conversation with your campus CIO or your provost or whoever it is on your campus that might be able to move that ball down the field. Those are all fine ideas, and we do actually ask our users to help us with that, but it's not good enough. And so the right now solution is an unaffiliated IDP, also known as IDPs of Last Resort. I could see lots of good conversation going on about that in the comments here in the chat. LIGO started out using Google, and also we stood up our own IDP of Last Resort. We called it LIGO Guest. More recently, we have been beginning to point our users towards unitedid.org and also the brand new NCSA identity provider of Last Resort, or unaffiliated IDP, that has recently been stood up in the last few days. And that's great. We really, at LIGO, we want to see an ecosystem of unaffiliated IDPs spring up that support different types of use cases, have different sustainability models. We really think that's the best approach. We don't think a one-size-fits-all approach is going to work for the community. Ultimately, we do plan, and we've already tried to begin turning off and deprovision LIGO Guest. We don't want to run an IDP of Last Resort if we can help it. Until recently, we did only have Google and LIGO as the choices. We offered that for 2 years, and what we did find was that by far most researchers chose LIGO Guest instead of Google. And the evidence we have after talking with a number of them is that they really do understand the Google privacy trade-off, or the trade-off, privacy trade-off with all of the social identity providers. So scientists are aware of it, and it's not that they aren't aware of it, but they do have this need to get to the services, and they are going to use whatever they have to get there. But in talking to researchers, we find that they really do prefer to use their campus identity. And we just had a recent use case. It was just within the last 2 weeks. We had a user from one of the Max Planck Institutes, an astronomer. Their IDP is not available on Edugain right now. We're trying not to provision any more LIGO Guest identities, so we asked them, hey, can you use Google? And we got back information that says the IT rules of his institute do not allow him to use a Google for the institute's business. Now, we're following up on that. We don't really know if it's a real or perceived constraint, but that's really an irrelevant point for us. The researcher needs to get to the service, needs to do it now. We're hearing from more than one person that this needs to happen, both collaborators on their side and on our side. The breaking news is just yesterday, the user successfully used the brand new NCSA IDP and has accessed our services. And after his enrollment, he's going to get everyone on his team, that's 8 more people, to go through the same process. They can do a self-sign-up, and then we approve them. We have a delegated structure to approve those enrollments through co-manage. So this is great news, and thank you, Jim Basney. I think you're online, for standing up at IDP of Last Resort. That's really fantastic. So just one last slide. you can see some of the things that LIGO will be pursuing after attribute release. And the last thing I just want to mention is that your research organization partners in the Federation, we have a bit more flexibility and tolerance than maybe some of the campuses do. And I think you should be using that. I think InCommon can leverage us to help drive InCommon forward, and we can do a lot of great things together.
Okay, thank you, Scott, and thank you also to Kathleen and to Chris, and also to Vaughn for serving as our kind of host and moderator today. I posted in the chat, and you see it on your screen, an evaluation. If you have a few minutes to fill that out, it's helpful for us, both in terms of evaluating this session and planning future sessions. I want to mention, too, that the Internet 2 Technology Exchange is coming up in Miami, and you see a link there for Trust and Identity. We have a base camp on Sunday afternoon. There are some other tutorials on Sunday as well, one on the ORCID identifier and one on co-manage. And then camp will take place on Monday and Tuesday of that week, and advanced camp on Wednesday and Thursday. And we're also spending Tuesday afternoon just for working groups. So the whole afternoon there'll be 2 working groups at a time at 4 different time slots in the afternoon to give more time for that work to take place. A few webinars coming up. The InCommon Technical Advisory Committee will do a community update 2 weeks from today, and you can see the link on your screen there. And you can see our next IM Online in September, and a webinar with Unicon also in September. And finally, we have a Shibboleth workshop coming up. It'll be the last one of the year. It's specifically to Shibboleth installation, and we